Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, Trump's aggressive purge of illegal immigrants has had an unexpected turn by gifting enemies of the Sikh community fake news ammunition to damage the image of Gurdwaras as a safe haven. Meanwhile, better news north of the border as Chandra Arya's political ambition to lead Canada is given the unceremonious boot. And here in the UK, RSS mouthpiece Bob Blackman's outrageous slander in the British Parliament against the Khalistan movement sees the story even catching the attention of both the Indian press and Kangana Ranaut herself as the RSS machinery closes ranks. And finally, we pay tribute to Baaz News, which completes its fourth year bringing deeply researched and informative articles from the community to the community. All this and more on today's show, but joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers out there. Once again, I've been paying attention to all those amazing comments on there. And just for clarification, even if I don't agree with your comments, I still give a thumbs up. And that's just my way of saying that I've read your comment and I appreciate you taking the time to share those with us. So yeah, with that, Angus, we always enjoy reading those comments, don't we?
We absolutely do. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And we will indeed, of course, be taking our usual look at those comments at the end of the show. So do keep tuned for that. Right, James, let's get things underway. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
I don't know whether the community is in shock or just too busy laughing to really say much, and that is because Chandra Arya has been given the boot by the Liberals in regards to the race for the leadership and potentially the role of Prime Minister in the next, in the interim before the next election. But in any event, let's take a quick look at his original announcement in that announcing that he was running for the leadership race.
Hello, I'm Chandra Arya, Member of Parliament for Nepean. I'm running to be the next Prime Minister of Canada to lead a small, more efficient government to rebuild our nation and secure prosperity for future generations. I've always worked hard for what is best for Canadians. For the sake of our children and grandchildren, we must make bold decisions that are absolutely necessary. If elected, as the next leader of the Liberal Party, I offer my knowledge and expertise to do so. We are facing significant structural problems that haven't been seen for generations, and solving them will require tough choices. Our economic growth and fiscal strength are not benefiting many Canadians. Today, many Canadians, especially younger generations, face significant affordability issues. Working middle class is struggling today, and many working families are retiring directly into poverty. We must make tough decisions now, not only to revitalize our economy, but also to ensure a stable society. I have the solutions and the real determination to make it happen. With prudence and pragmatism as my guiding principles, I will make the big and bold decisions needed to rebuild our economy and foster prosperity for all generations. Canada can do better.
And I thought I would just clip it off there where he says Canada can do better, and it looks like we are.
I think they call that editorial, James.
So in any event, yeah, he is out. And I think that it really shouldn't come as a surprise to most, especially after his comments about it not mattering that he does not speak French, when there is such a sizable French community in Quebec that says it does matter. French is a very integral part of Canada, and he just didn't seem to get that fact. Now, what's really interesting is that not only has he been given the boot, but now he's coming back and he's saying that via his social media that the decision raises questions about the transparency and legitimacy of the leadership selection process. And I think quite the opposite. It shows that they are taking it seriously and they want leadership in the Liberal Party who is going to be able to convince Canadians that we are in need of change, but also that in individual leading the party is capable of making that change. And this here is from a gentleman who is an MP for the Nepean area in Ontario, who talks about fiscal responsibility and budgets and cutting down on spending. And yet, if you look at the federal budget and his expenditures, he has some pretty serious oversight or overlooking some very serious matters that may only be in the thousands of dollar range, but it's very simple. His cellular and mobile plans are constantly every month way over on their data and talk usage, costing hundreds of dollars a month, thousands of dollars a year, when all he has to do is spend the extra $20 a month to get an unlimited plan. I mean, it's common sense and very easy to fix. So, I mean, I think that with that kind of mentality, that if you're not paying attention to the small details, Canadians aren't going to trust that you're going to pay attention to the major details when it comes to our federal budget. And I think that really plays a role. And to quote the section of the party's policies in which they say his exclusion from the race was a result of, it clearly says that manifestly unfit for the office of leader of the party. Very clearly they are, although they haven't, the Liberal Party hasn't come right out with a direct statement, they quoted this section of the policies and procedures of the Liberal Party of Canada. And again, I'll repeat that, manifestly unfit for office of the party leader. And I just laugh at that because it's just so clear that with his involvement with India, with Narendra Modi, and other questionable activities, of course, we have real concerns. Now, I found it also very interesting that there was a gentleman by the name of Salman Seema who responded on the X platform, and he said, "We will criminalize the glorification and display of support of terrorists, extremists, and terrorist organizations," in which he was quoting Mr. Arya in one of his speeches. And essentially what he was targeting was obviously not the Hindutva and the Hindu extremists, but probably the Sikh and other communities in which he doesn't agree with, or that he takes lead from Narendra Modi when it comes to targeting certain parts of the Canadian diaspora in various areas. And really, I think that this shows that not only does the Liberal Party not trust him as a leader, but neither should the Canadian public. And with that, I say good luck, goodbye, and good riddance, Angus.
I think there's probably very few in our audience who'll be weeping the fact that his ambitions and his aspirations sort of burning embers are sort of dying as we speak. No bad thing. I mean, it's very clear, this guy. I mean, we mustn't forget, he only arrived in Canada, I think it was in 2006. So he's been in Canada less than 20 years after spending basically most of his adult life in India, and clearly being channeled up through an RSS-affiliated lifestyle. And suddenly arrives in Canada, clearly supported by whatever means by RSS institutions, because he's bearing this sort of typical RSS Hindutva right-wing agenda. Clearly that's his own opinions, which align very carefully and closely to the RSS, and therefore that's imposing or certainly influencing his political agenda, which has no place, frankly, in Canadian politics. And I think, I mean, even just looking at the guy himself, I mean, as we talked about before, he was just so self-destructive from the start. I mean, his own political campaigning, where he dismissed out of hand the whole cultural thing with the French language. I mean, again, it shows a little bit of immaturity and inexperience as a politician of whatever background, whatever ethnicity. This has nothing to do with his ethnicity or his background. This is literally his complete ignorance of Canadian essential, basic, embedded Canadian culture. You can't just dismiss it out of hand. And with all due respect to the guy, again, speaking in broken English, he's only been in Canada less than 20 years, and he's now asking to lead the nation. It just doesn't happen. It's just not going to happen in anybody's book, whatever his background. So unfortunately, I think, I mean, I got to admire his ambitions and his admirations. I'd never, take it away from anybody who really pushes their own ambitions ambitions and aspirations, but ultimately it appears he's not a good guy. He really does represent a dangerous agenda, and certainly his track record in the past is very clearly anti-Sikh, anti-Khalistan, powerfully anti-Khalistan. And I think this whole agenda of and actually it's interesting seeing his supporters saying, look, he was anti-domestic terrorism. He was standing up for homegrown terrorism that was sprouting up in Canada, obviously referring to the Khalistan movement. Well, I'm sorry, but the only terrorism that I see in Canada is actually coming from India itself, the Hindu elements, the Hindu diaspora from Canada. These are the people who are terrorising the Khalistan movement, who are terrorising the Sikh community in Canada, who are the ones who are going out there in the streets, in these riots, going out there armed with sticks and iron rods and all sorts of things, etc., and attacking peaceful Khalistan protesters. It's, that's the only homegrown Canadian domestic terrorism I see. And indeed, the organised crime that's sprung up coming from, again, the Indian Hindu diaspora. The murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, where's that come? That's come from India. That's come from the RSS Hindutva backed government. It's very clear to me where Chandra Arya lies. It's he is sitting with the actual terrorists, and it's not coming. Those terrorists are not the Khalistan movement. They're coming from organised crime and political criminals, effectively from India. So yeah, it's no surprise that he's kicked out. Even the Liberals, Trudeau's Liberal Party, clearly they're not stupid. They know if they've got any chance at the next election, there's no way they could have had somebody like Chandra Arya, whatever his principles, which clearly are tainted anyway. There's no way they'd have let him lead the party. So good riddance, James. And I think we're entering a quite a worrying era in Canadian politics, because of course there are some of the people who are potentially the next Prime Minister, and I'm looking at people like, well, we've talked about Pierre Poilievre, who clearly has his own agenda, and that's not good. But there's also Mark Carney who's entered the frame, and I know Mark Carney, not personally, but I know of Mark Carney because he was our former governor of the Bank of England here in the UK, and he was actually, and I don't want to go down this road because it's a completely different, it's an irrelevant discussion to what we talk about, but he was behind a lot of the problems, economic problems we have here in the UK, related to keeping interest rates so low for so long, etc., etc. He caused a huge bubble in the British housing market, which is having massive economic implications. So the guy has clearly had his own agenda, and he is very closely linked to the World Economic Forum and the globalists. That's what worries me, and he potentially could be the next Prime Minister of Canada, once again bringing in this WEF agenda, which again is irrelevant to what we talk about, but in and of itself is not good for the world, and particularly I don't think the community that we represent, I don't think is paid any favours by the WEF agenda either. So, but anyway, that's an argument we don't want to go down, James, but certainly, yeah, I think we're entering a very interesting time, a slightly worrying time in Canadian politics.
Right. And something I found very interesting is that I don't believe that one quote, the Twitter post that I referred to, and I don't believe that this individual is well educated on Chandra Arya and his involvement with India and such, because he claims to have been a political prisoner in Iran, that he alleges that he was attacked for being a Canadian. Now that he's here and waving a Canadian flag at a protest in Ottawa or Toronto and, things like this. So I don't think he really understands why the concern is around Arya, because he says that he's gained more respect for him since this event and those speeches. So I think that, maybe he's just misinformed that way. And the fact that, Arya had also claimed that he wanted to abolish the monarchy in Canada. Well, that's a very touchy subject as well, and probably something that he as an individual should have stayed away from. And I don't say that because of race. I say that because of his lack of nuance and understanding of Canadian culture and history. I just don't think that he has the full grasp of that claim or that direction. So yeah, I just, like you said, he has aspirations, but the Liberal Party just kicked him right in the aspirations. But let's move along there. I'll try to keep my stories a bit shorter tonight so we're not running so far over into the weeds, as they say in golf. And next we're going to talk about the anger and frustration that flared up online because ICE was raiding Gurdwaras in New Jersey and New York, which turns out it is completely false. There's absolutely no truth, so I will repeat that once more. Absolutely no truth to that, according to the leaders of the Sikh community in both New Jersey and New York, and especially in the Richmond Hills area of New York, in which it was referring to. So the ICE and Customs and Immigration have also confirmed that they have not conducted any raids on any Gurdwaras, and at the end of the day, there was talk or information that there may have been a few agents that went into a Gurdwara for a conversation, not looking for people, not going in as a raid, not surveilling anybody, but actually going in as a step towards educating the leadership on just what to do if they have concerns about what's going on, given that there is so much divide and there are so many people that are going to extremes on one end and the other. They just want to make sure that the people are safe, and that is apparently what this conversation was about. It was not about coming in to raid the facility. It was not about arresting illegals or checking immigration status of anybody. However, with that said, it's very important to understand that although the stories were fake, they got a lot of traction on social media and throughout other media. And surprise, 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 Angus, it started from what we can tell with the Godi media. It seems that stories were coming out of the Narendra Modi controlled media of India and the disinformation machine that he controls. So of course we have to look at that. These are allegations that are not yet proven, but all fingers are pointing in that direction, and when there's smoke, there's usually fire. With that, we know that this is a general practice of Narendra Modi, of the RSS, of RAW, to instill anger, to create distrust, to lack in the support of security and safety, or that sense of feeling of security and safety within the Gurdwaras, and the sense of community. And this really has a big implication, because when false information such as this gets out, it creates a vacuum effect. Kids are removed from school. People are reportedly not showing up for work, and that's not to do with the Sikh community, but there's reports of Mexicans not showing up for work on construction sites, on farms and agriculture facilities, and many others because of the fear of these raids. And now with them placing that distrust and the discord between the officials, the law enforcement, the government agencies, and the religious communities, it really puts more of a divide in all of those communities and the trust within the communities. Now, if there are threats, it could deter people from actually calling law enforcement, feeling that if they bring any attention to themselves, even as legal citizens of the U.S., legal residents of the U.S., or even legal visitors to the U.S., they are now feeling that eyes are upon them, and they're going to be subjected to unfair ridicule, unfair bias, and unfair treatment. So it really has a tidal wave effect when it not only impacts the Gurdwara, but of course now that information flows out to the other places of worship, to other religious and cultural communities, and now that misinformation is being just brought off the internet and into mainstream conversations and perpetuating a fear that is not realistic. The Trump administration has made steps and announcements that they have removed what they called the breach of safety areas or sensitive areas. That included schools, playgrounds, religious and houses of worship, and hospitals. However, although they have been informed, these different religious facilities have been told that there may be activity within the proximity to Gurdwaras, to temples, to churches, and such. It's not being brought onto the property. It's not being brought inside of the facilities at this time. And again, the policy has been removed to treat them as sensitive areas and to avoid them. But at the same time, there still seems to be an unspoken word that they will respect the actual property and the physical facilities within the walls. With that said, though, the Quakers in the U.S., another religious organization that has a bigger presence over in the East, Northeast more or less, they've actually filed suit against the U.S. government in the fact that they have gone away with the protection of the sensitive areas, and they are taking a leadership role in taking the Trump administration and the U.S. government to court on that. So we'll see how that plays out, because it wasn't a law. It was more a policy that was not legal or binding to a point that they couldn't just remove it. So again, that is very much in the air right now, we'll say. Now, the following is an excerpt from the Indian Express, and it said that Devinder Singh Boparia, and I probably pronounced that wrong, my apologies, of the Sikh Cultural Center Gurdwara in Richmond Hill, New York, said, "These reports are entirely fake. No such raids have occurred at any Gurdwara in our area." He emphasized that Gurdwaras are a place of worship and peace, and people come here to pray, but such misinformation creates unnecessary panic among the community. Gianni Damavir Singh, the head priest of the Gurdwara Sikh Cultural Society in Richmond Hill, also denied the reports about the raids. In a video, he said such news that the illegal immigrants and terrorists have been arrested from Gurdwaras are fake. There has been similar fake news about the Gurdwara Sikh Cultural Society. Devotees have been coming for worship as usual. Prominent Sikh activist Japneet Singh said in the same video, there has been a lot of conflicting information circulating all day. Throughout the day, our team has met and called every Gurdwara leadership in New York. We have found that Richmond Hill Gurdwara was not involved with any raids. Our Gurdwara in New York, not in Richmond Hill, was visited by ICE but not raided. There were members of the Sikh community who were detained but not at the Gurdwara, he added. So a lot of information getting mixed and misinformation therefore being spread. In a Facebook post, Janpeet said Gurdwara leaderships were briefed on what to do if ICE agents or law enforcement agencies do try to enter the Gurdwara. Under the current administration's direction, houses of worship can be targeted, so they should stay vigilant regardless. Now more than ever, we have a responsibility to be there for one another. We are all immigrants in one way or another. We all have a story. I think there's a narrative being spread that makes it seem as if every immigrant is a criminal, and that's very dangerous. Let's hold our community down and ensure we share the proper information with our brothers and sisters. We will be holding an immigration resource fair and encourage the community to participate in it, whether you are documented or not. So again, you can just search them online and get further information about that event. It should be very important and very informative. Now, Sikhs for Justice also responded to the false stories that are being spread, and again, they are stating that they believe it to be a part of the Modi media machine, and that it is a common belief among both the Sikh community and those outside of the community that India probably has a hand in the misinformation to create chaos, which they continually do. And that's just another example of how they're inflicting their chaos on the diaspora in Canada, the US, and of course the UK as well. So as you can see, just the response from Sikhs for Justice, and they are clear on what their feelings are, who they think is behind it, and confirming once again that no such raids have happened. And with that, we'll pretty much leave it at that for everyone, just to stay vigilant, be aware, but at the same time, don't believe everything you're seeing online, because once again, the RSS, the RAW, and these other agencies, and it's not just them. It's as far away as Iran, Russia, China. They are all getting their crap together to create this misinformation campaign, because they know that, again, as I've described previously, it's like a bacteria. They want the country to just basically eat itself and just implode on itself through this chaos, through this division, and through creating anger and mistrust against each of the and every person and community. So again, don't let them win. Be strong, be vigilant, but at the same time, make sure that you are spreading facts, not fiction. And with that, Angus, I think that is valuable, important news story and information for us here in Canada, for everyone in the US, and of course for you and all of the communities there in the UK.
Yes, I think very interesting statement made there. And it's just true. And we often say this. In the US, we are all immigrants. Yeah, I mean, pretty much everybody in the US is an immigrant of some sort, however many generations. And that's the reality. What Trump's whole program is about illegal immigrants. And again, there's no racism, there's nothing, there's no hidden agenda here. If you are here in the US illegally, you therefore, by definition, should not be here. That's what it's all about. So there's actually nothing wrong with what he's doing, and this is why he was elected. That's the reason why this is happening. But I think what is going on, and clearly this is very interesting take on what is actually going on, because this really highlights something that we've often talked about, and this is India. India, once again, being very cynical, very mischievous, and very deliberate in what they're doing here. There's a very clear agenda. And the big question you have to ask, why are they doing it? Why is this misinformation being spread? What's it achieving? Well, it's achieving something very clear. What it's trying to do is it's trying to paint the Trump administration as being somewhat fascist, and this is again is what the left wing. This is the left wing's favourite sort of attack on the right wing. It happens here in the UK just as much as it does in the US. Is they're trying to paint Trump as a fascist, and fascism. I mean, it's really offensive when this term is thrown around so loosely and so falsely and so ignorantly, because true fascism it occurred in the 1930s in Germany and indeed in Italy. At the time, it was a deep, deep evil that took root and led to literally tens of millions of people dying as a result. That was true fascism. So when people label people like Trump or the right wing across Europe as fascists, no, they're not fascists. They're just right wing politicians. So, but it's this fear of fascism that is being deliberately used and abused by the Indian administration, by the Indian government, and of course by that read the RSS and Hindutva. They are deliberately trying to paint the Trump administration as fascist. Ironically, they're using the left wing as their useful idiots to paint Trump as a fascist. Now, why are they doing that? They're doing this because it serves their purpose actually very well, despite the fact that Trump, ironically, is also right wing, like the RSS and the BJP in India. But what it does, it serves their agenda. Their agenda is to damage and divide the minorities amongst the Indian diaspora, of course, including the Hindus, not just the Sikhs, but the Hindus as well, and of course the Muslim population. They're trying to create division. They're trying to create, as you say, James, chaos, and they're trying to create fear. And this is what fascism is all about. It's about fear. Now, for any government, any administration to raid a place of worship, whether that is a Gurdwara, a church, a temple, whatever, or a mosque, that is a deeply, deeply provocative thing. So any government will only ever do that as an absolute last resort, because of course it's so deeply provocative against any culture or any minority. So they will only literally do that as an absolute last resort. So it is very, very, very unlikely that the Trump administration would ever do this, unless, as you say, James, there is a very carefully managed entrance into a Gurdwara and in the most unprovocative way to have discussions, whatever it may be. It will never be an aggressive entry into a place of worship, whichever religion, unless there is an absolute, solid, legal, cultural, social reason to do so. So, in other words, they haven't been doing it, as you've said, Jez. But the Indian Godi media, and particularly the Hindutva army online, are using this misinformation for a very clear purpose. They're trying to paint the Trump administration as somehow fascist because it serves their purpose. Why? Well, let me go back to the 1930s. One of Hitler's and the Nazi Party's most successful methods to gain power and gain control was to paint their opposition as the fascists. They painted any opposition to the Nazi Party as fascists, which of course persuaded many people, which of course then propelled the Nazis into power. And this is what the Godi media, this is what the BJP and the RSS are doing in India. They're trying to paint their enemies as fascists. And likewise here, they're spinning the same sort of methodology into the US, trying to paint Trump as some sort of fascist who's attacking the Sikh community and attacking the Islamic community and all the other minorities in the US, because again, it's damaging, it's creating division, it's creating this chaos that actual genuine fascist regimes do. That's what India's doing here. So again, it's an extension of Indian fascism by doing this. And of course, Gurdwaras, temples, mandirs, all these places, churches, mosques, they are places of sanctuary, they are places of peace, they are places of worship. And particularly for the Sikhs, the Gurdwara is universally known as a place of sanctuary. Langar is all about providing sanctuary, a safe haven for anybody, whatever their background, whatever their political, social status, it doesn't matter. Everybody's welcome in a Gurdwara to sit down and share langar. That is what a Gurdwara is about. That is a deep threat to what India, or the BJP rather, stand for, what the RSS stand for. They fear the Sikh religion, they fear Sikhi, they fear everything it stands for because it stands against their very fundamental principles of the caste system, which has propped up the RSS and Hindutva for literally thousands of years, actually. So they fear Sikhi, so they will do everything they can to break down the central foundations of Sikhi, and of course the biggest foundation of Sikhi is the Gurdwara itself. So they're doing everything they can to tarnish, to stain, to smear the sanctity of a Gurdwara. That's what this is all about. It's very deliberate, it's very devious, it's very evil, and it's very, very typical, James, of India, BJP, RSS tactics.
Absolutely, Angus. And there's also the rumor out there that ICE is paying a $750 reward if you turn in your neighbor or others who may be illegals. That, again, is false. Don't fall for it. It is not true. There's no money being paid for you to be a rat. So don't do it. And don't waste your time, and don't be falling for that. And in closing to that story, Angus, I'm just going to read this quick paragraph that I wrote earlier with the whole article there, and that is: to interrupt the ability for all persons of faith to feel safe attending these sacred locations is to go against the historic principles and beliefs of the nation at large. Respect and appreciation for all faiths in the land of opportunity and equality. In other words, land of the free. When even legal citizens, residents, and visitors cannot feel safe that they will be free of interference and intimidation within the sanctity of a Gurdwara, synagogue, temple, church, and other such facilities, it is a slap in the face to the nation and to those who have served to protect all of those rights. And I think that wraps up that part, Angus, and we'll throw it back to you to see what you've got for us tonight.
Indeed,
today,
James.
Morning.
Absolutely. Yes, I think, James, that really, I think, sums up that India, by India, I mean the RSS and Hindutva and the BJP, they fear the sanctity, they fear the stability of the Gurdwara, which by extension, you scale it up, that's why they fear khalistan, because khalistan itself will provide a sanctuary, it will provide stability, that will be a deeply seductive, a deeply attractive place for any Indians, for anybody in that region to move to. That's why they fear it. They really genuinely, again, it's just another sign of this fear that the RSS and Hindutva have for the Sikh community and by extension the Khalistan movement. So anyway, James, let us move on indeed to my first story and talking about the tentacles of the RSS. I covered yesterday the story of Bob Blackman, this British MP, this Conservative MP, who's quite outrageously slandered the Khalistan movement in the British Parliament. And he has actually, he referred to the Khalistan movement as terrorists. And this is, again, all about this emergency film, Kangana Ranaut's film Emergency, this dreadfully misrepresentative biopic of Indira Gandhi, which has again smeared the Sikh community. It smeared people like Sant Janal Bundranwali, and many others in the Sikh community. And of course, the film itself has caused outrage across all cinemas, across the community in the diaspora around the world. And but Bob Blackman, who himself has been on the payroll of the RSS, as was uncovered by Byline Times only a couple of years ago, Bob Blackman, this British MP, I've actually managed finally to track down this his speech that he made in the Houses of Parliament only a few days ago. Let me play this for you. You can hear it in his own words.
Now, in addition, Madam Deputy Speaker, on Sunday, many of my constituents gathered and paid for a screening of the film Emergency in the Harrowview Cinema. About 30 to 40 minutes into the screening of that film, masked Khalistani terrorists burst in and threatened members of the audience and forced the screening to end. I understand that similar disruption took place in Wolverhampton, Birmingham, Slough, Staines and Manchester. As a result, View Cinemas and Cineworld have pulled the film from being screened. Now, this is a very controversial film, and I don't comment on the quality or content of the film, but I do defend the right of my constituents and others to be able to view that film and make a decision on it. It covers the period when Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India, and it is very controversial, and there are certain views that this is an anti-Sikh film. But I think members of our constituents should be able to see this film and judge for themselves and not be threatened by thugs who want to disrupt democratic opportunities to see public films. So could we have a statement from the Home Secretary next week on what is going to be done to ensure that people who want to see these films, and they've been passed by the censors, want to see these films can do so in peace and harmony? I absolutely defend the right of people to demonstrate outside the cinemas, but not to disrupt the actual viewing.
He raises a very important matter about the relationship between free speech and the right to protest peacefully, and for people to be able to go about doing their activities freely, whatever they choose to do, whether that's seeing a film that, as he says, has been agreed by the censors and all of those that look at these issues. I will certainly make sure that he and indeed the whole House, Madam Deputy Speaker, does get an update on those very important matters that he raises.
He's a piece of work, is Bob Blackman. He posted the speech up on his X account, and he said, "I raised the horrific intimidation of my constituents and many others as pro-Khalistan thugs disrupted screenings of the new emergency film. Some cinemas even pulled the film in fear of more disruption. We must stand up to anyone trying to silence free speech." Well, yeah, I call him a piece of work. I mean, he's very cynically used this whole democratic principle of freedom of speech to try and defend his position. But basically, he is mouthpiecing the RSS. I don't think he clearly understands really what he is saying, the people that he represents. When he talks about free speech, what about his RSS paymasters in India? Do you think they allow free speech in India? I don't think so, because anybody who raises any objections in India finds themselves in prison, Mr. Blackman. So unfortunately, his cynical stance is really, I think, quite appalling. And but one must put this in context. Why is he saying this? Well, firstly, he has been in the payroll of the RSS, so he's just mouthing essentially what is being fed by the RSS. He probably has. He's probably completely deeply ignorant of the general truth about what has actually happened in the history of Indian politics and what has led to a lot of these protests. But also, there's just a very clear thing that he is the MP for I think it's West Harrow, anyway, one of the Harrow constituencies west of London, which has a very, very large Indian diaspora population. Gujaratis primarily. It's known as Mini Gujarati. Mini Gujarat. And so one could argue in his defence, ironically, that he's only representing the views of his Gujarat constituents. Well, yeah, but not to the extent that you then start painting and actually slandering a whole political movement, the Khalistan movement, as he called it, terrorists. Now, you'll notice also in his speech there, James, he used the word Khalistani terrorists. Well, that in itself is slander. And there has to be, I think, a legal case against him for that slander. He also talked about how these protesters threatened members of the audience. Well, if they had threatened members of the audience, as he falsely claims in Parliament, then the police would have got involved, because it is a criminal offence to threaten somebody. And yet, there have been no arrests, there have been no charges, etc., etc. And as I'll talk about in a moment, it's complete nonsense. And finally, he refers to them both in his speech and in his X article as thugs. Again, it's pretty slanderous. Now, he is protected, as he well knows, by parliamentary privilege. He can pretty much say whatever he wants in Parliament, safe in the knowledge that nobody can sue him for slander. Basically, he can call the Khalistan movement terrorist because he knows nobody can sue him under parliamentary privilege. He's a coward, in other words. He's an RSS coward, is what he is. But anyway, that's why the Sikh Federation of the UK has raised a formal complaint with the Standards Committee in the British Parliament, because a British MP, a standing MP, should not be allowed to get away with something as absolutely appalling as that against a peaceful democratic political movement. Anyway, so all that aside, this story has rumbled on actually, and it's unsurprisingly hit the Indian media, of course, who jumped on this, and of course the Godi media and all the RSS sort of organisations and paid outlets have all closed ranks on this to try and bolster Blackman's stance on this. And of course, to unsurprisingly attack the Sikh community who came out and successfully protested against this dreadful film. And of course, the Times of India, which is representative of a lot of Indian media which have followed the same story, of course covered this. They headlined "Khalistani's Storm Emergency Show in the UK. Cops say they have a right to protest." And this is interesting actually, because in their article, of course the article in this particular article, like most Godi media articles, is very damning, very condemning, and very one-sided article, and tries to tear down and really smear the whole protests about it. But they did actually acknowledge that when it happened in one of the cinemas, police arrived within 10 minutes but did not arrest anyone. They told us they were within their protest rights as long as we were not harmed. A couple of the staff seemed scared and the manager seemed shaken, and one of the people, the Indian diaspora group, was asked to continue with the film, but the manager told them it was cancelled. It's terrifying that mob rule succeeds. There was no one to protect us. Some had kirpans on them. It's not nice that you can't even go and watch a movie in the UK. This was masked men shouting in the dark. We didn't know what their intentions were. It was frightening. Yeah, well, not half as frightening as it was in the Harmandir Sahib in 1984, or indeed to be a Sikh in the Punjab in the 1980s and 1990s. So, but that's another thing. So again, there's this reference to masked men and kirpans being intimidating. Well, the reason they were masked, as we said yesterday, is because these men fear the hit squads of India. They fear these assassination squads coming out of India. Yeah, unfortunately, that's real fear. If you really want to know what fear is, they daren't share their faces because they could be murdered in their own homes or outside the Gurdwaras, like Hardeep Singh Nijjar was. That's why they wear masks. They wear kirpans in your absolute ignorance, clearly, because that is what's called an article of faith, which again, you Hindu imperialists, you Hindutva fascists, and that is a genuine use of the word, they're trying to drive out. They're trying to stop the Sikh Amritdhari Sikhs from wearing their kirpans, their articles of faith, which are peaceful articles of faith, as is written within the Indian constitution itself. So sorry about that. And Kangana Ranaut, yes, even the nemesis herself, this producer, director and star of this very film Emergency herself, Kangana Ranaut, wades into this discussion, unsurprisingly. Another RSS mouthpiece, another essentially paid mouthpiece for Hindutva. She slams Indian politicians for their silence over the controversy and highlighting the support. Yes, she actually praises Bob Blackman for his support. So again, essentially, it just proves, if there was any doubt, that Bob Blackman is a useful idiot of the RSS, another paid mouthpiece of the RSS, typical politician. He'll just basically spout whatever he's paid to spout. and that's what he's done. And even so, Kangana Ranort endorses him. In other words, just confirming, if there's any doubt, that Bob Blackman is a mouthpiece of the RSS. She said, and again has been reported, she was actually upset that more Indian politicians haven't actually stood up for the emergency controversy. She took to social media and she actually said in a post on social media, British MP raises his voice for my fundamental right of free speech. Meanwhile, pin drop silence from Indian politicians and feminists. Oh dear, poor Kangana Ranort. You know, my heart bleeds for her. And she wrote, essentially, she just continued along in the same vein. But she said on Sunday, a UK Conservative Party MP that she refers to, obviously Bob Blackman, called on the Home Secretary to take action after what he called masked Khalistani terrorists disrupted the screening of her film, etc., etc. And it goes on. But and I think what was most concerning about all this, and the Times and much of the Godi media reported on the story, all very predictably, all very anti-Sikh coverage, anti-protesters coverage. They refer to these protesters as, well, they use just about every name they could find in the vocabulary to smear them. But I think what is always telling is when you read the comments after these articles, which are just ordinary Indians and generally from the Hindu majority population of India, to get a sense of what the majority feelings are within the Hindu population about these stories. And the top comment said as follows: the UK is playing into the hands of radicals and jihadis. Where is the law of the land when such protests happen openly? The cowards are also scared, and that's why they came masked. Shouldn't they be arrested right away? Well, again, let's pick apart this comment because it's quite an interesting insight into the mindset of the average Indian. So the average Indian believes that the UK is playing into the hands of radicals and jihadis, and again referring to the Islamic population here and the extremist end of the Islamic population. So they're now actually they're claiming that Khalistan protesters, in fact, not even Khalistan protesters, these are just ordinary Sikhs who are protesting. So this person now perceives an ordinary Sikh protester in the UK as a radical or a jihadi, therefore a terrorist. That is the perception of the average Indian. And again, this is a pure, simple byproduct of the Godi media's indoctrination, where they have constantly referred to Khalistanis and Sikhs as terrorists, and this is rubbing off on the Indian population. So here we have an ordinary Indian just assuming that these Sikh protesters are radicals and jihadists. And where is the law of the land when such protests happen only? Well, here in the UK, we have a democracy, believe it or not, unlike you in India. Unfortunately, what you don't realise is that, yes, we have a right to protest here in the UK. We have a freedom of speech and we have a right to protest, which even Bob Blackman had to cynically use in his defence as well. And then again, this argument that they were cowards and they were scared because they came masked. Well, again, I refer back to earlier comments, James. They were masked for a very good reason, because they are scared. They're not cowards. They are genuinely scared. They are scared of being murdered like Hardeep Singh Nijjar, probably like Avtar Singh Kanda, like Gurpatan Singh Panoon was almost murdered, and like thousands, hundreds of thousands of young Sikhs were murdered in the 1980s and 1990s across the Punjab. That is fear, Mr. Norik P. That is genuine fear. That is why they are wearing masks, because they have a genuine fundamental fear of your government and what they are capable of. And it's what you need to wake up. That is the government that is governing you. That is the government that you probably voted for. Hargin Gupta followed up with a load of other stuff, but also said, look, Bharat, India, this is the Hindutva word for India, Bharat. Bharat has copied the democratic laws from such a lawless country. Shameful and dangerous, as the moviegoers could have been hurt or killed. The protesters were armed at least with a kirpan. Okay, well, first and foremost, yeah, India did inherit British law, absolutely. So you can't criticise British law, because essentially they are your own laws as well. So if you've got an issue with British law, then why don't you complain about Indian law. And in fact, Indian law has actually taken British law and put it on steroids. You should actually see what your government, the BJP government, have done to your law. They've made it even worse, should we say, even more persecuting of the minorities. That's what your government has done. And again, we have this reference to the kirpan. The kirpan is not a weapon. It is not there to be used as a weapon. It is never there as a weapon. It is used as an article of faith. And again, it comes from this deep ignorance. And again, this is another sign, another symptom of how the Gaudiya media's indoctrination and propaganda has really worked with the Hindu population of India, where now even the Hindus are seeing the kirpan not as an article of faith, but as a weapon. That is what the sub-narrative, the sub-agenda here is of this comment. Armed at least with a kirpan. In other words, he's assuming those kirpans, those swords, those articles of faith, were there as a weapon to intimidate and threaten. That is absolutely not what a kirpan is about, but that is his perception. And then finally, another comment to wrap this up. And again, we talk about kirpans. Ban carrying kirpans in the UK and Australia. People in the UK and Australia have always raised this as a security issue. These khalistanis are now going to take this as a possibility due to their open hatred and anti-social activities. It's a shame this is being openly supported and allowed by the government. Again, somebody calling for banning kirpans, because again, this indoctrination is working. They're now perceiving the kirpan not as an article of faith, as is written in the Indian constitution, but as a weapon. It's a threat. It's intimidating to the Hindus well, in fact, not just the Hindus in India, is now referring to the Hindus and the wider populations in the diaspora and in the West. Well, I'm sorry, but here in the West, we don't have a problem with the kirpan. So you keep your ignorance to yourself in India, Mr. Imran Ali. So there you go, James. And I picked up just those three top comments from after one of those articles, just to give an idea. This is the average mindset of the average Hindu Indian. It's deeply upsetting. It's deeply disappointing. But you can't blame these guys. It's very easy to blame them for their ignorance. But this is the power of propaganda. This is the power of indoctrination. This is the power of hiding the truth from people like this. This is why the Gaudiya media have banned people like Satluj TV, like all these other channels like us. They are banned in India for this very reason, because these people are indoctrinated by one single narrative. They are indoctrinated by the Hindu narrative. That Hindutva narrative is anti-Sikh. It is anti-Khalistan. It is anti-minorities. It is all about pro-Hindu imperialism. That is why these ordinary Indians fear and hate the Sikh community, because they have been taught, they have been indoctrinated into doing so. It's just like the Nazi Party in the 1930s, who indoctrinated a whole civilized society of Germany in the 1930s to support the Nazi Party. That's what's happening in India. It's unfolding before our very eyes. And here is the proof, if ever we needed it, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And let's keep in mind here that in Canada, we have the largest Sikh diaspora outside of India. And ever since I was a child, I've been around and I've seen the Sikh community. I've seen the kirpans, and I have not once ever, and I reiterate, ever have I heard of somebody being assaulted or attacked or injured by a kirpan. I've just never heard of it. And I'm not a young guy, so, we're going back a few decades or more. But let's also take into effect that at one time Hollywood used to say that no news coverage was bad news coverage. And at times there was in the entertainment a practice of hiring protesters outside of theaters or concert venues to create a buzz about an event or a show or, different things. And that was marketing. It was considered marketing genius back in the day. But let's take a quick look now with this film and the creator. I've been reading up on this, Angus, and she reported in one periodical or one magazine article that she actually mortgaged her house to finish the film. So let me tell you, I don't know about these reports of the Khalistani terrorists coming into the theater and creating havoc and scaring everybody? Or is this just a pile of crap that's being exaggerated by her production company and her agents of media relations and public relations in order to sell more tickets to pay off that mortgage she apparently got on the house to finish the film? Let's face it, the Hollywood, Bollywood, and entertainment as a whole is not above doing such things to sell tickets and to make money. So that's also another potential involvement here and potential action that was taking place. So I'm going to go with that. Of course, yes, they are peacefully protesting outside. It's going to be exaggerated and create a buzz for the movie to sell more tickets, because let's face it, nothing sells more than controversy.
Absolutely right. It's the power of the media, which we talk about on a regular basis. Okay, and talking about the power of the media, let's move on to my second story, and I want to pay tribute to Baaz News. Baaz News posted up yesterday that they are 4 years old, and I have to say well done to Baaz News, because I've often dipped into Baaz News to find to get information and read their stories. They're very deliberately, when they were launched, they launched with a policy of producing, actually, I suppose it was almost counterintuitive at the time, of long-form, well-researched articles. And this is in an era when people's attention spans are really short. People need quick fixes. Everything's about the quick fix. People's lives are so busy. You only need to look at the average Hollywood film. If it doesn't have an explosion every sort of 3 minutes, then people's attention wanders and they get bored. So that's sort of the society and mindset that we operate in these days. So Baaz News was sort of launched almost counterintuitively to that sort of prevailing attitude. But I'm delighted to say that Baaz News has moved into its 5th year. And I'll just quickly go through what they posted up on their own website, which actually gives a bit of a background, a bit of insight into what they were all about and why they launched. They said that when they started, they were asked if this model, which prioritises the written word and patient content, would work in today's age of algorithms and short attention spans. Well, it did. I'm very happy to say. And as they said, we are 4 years old today. What started as a humble independent outlet for the Sikh and Punjabi diaspora has now developed into the digital news platform of record in the community. Our high-quality journalism on various topics this year, from the Hindu nationalist mob violence targeting Sikhs in Brampton, which of course we covered, James, Indian foreign interference at the Conservative Party of Canada, again, which we covered, Indian intelligence operating out of consulates around the world, the dark history of 3HO boarding schools generated mainstream headlines. So in other words, the topics that they themselves have raised have actually managed to grow wings and actually get into the mainstream media, which they have played no small part in achieving. You will be hard pressed to find the kind of original reporting that happens at Baaz anywhere else, and I'll totally endorse that. And they say then there's the analysis and opinion pieces as well, providing thought leadership and meaningful debate on issues of politics, culture and religion. They then say, within the roughly 2.5 million strong Sikh diaspora, our website, home to our now famous long-form articles, has passed a significant milestone. Over 1 million reads and over 750,000 unique visitors. Well done, Baz. Great figures, that. We also hit millions of impressions on our socials, even though we are entirely censored in India. Very important point there, James. Once again, we always talk about all our outlets. Baz News, ourselves, and many, many others like us are banned in India for a very good reason. Yet, fortunately, Baz News are reporting that, like us and like many of our outlets, we're actually getting a really good reach within the Sikh diaspora globally and increasingly within India itself, which is great news. And let's hope many of our own audience can access those of our audience in India itself, whether it's in the Punjab or outside the Punjab. If you can get access to VPNs or whatever, or change your settings or whatever to a different country settings, you can actually also read Baaz News. Let's certainly hope so. It's all about getting the truth. And if you really want the truth, if you want well-researched, in-depth articles, please read Baaz News. But anyway, the millions of views and reads we've garnered across mediums are almost wholly, sadly, from Canada, America, the UK and Australia. Again, it's not from India itself. We did this not by pumping out countless shallow articles engaging in clickbait or regurgitating press releases, but by publishing a small handful of pieces monthly, providing deep, meaningful coverage on issues impacting our communities. And since they started, we've stuck to our commitment to sharing credible, in-depth and unapologetic articles for the diaspora. We also stuck to high standards of journalistic integrity. Our followers prove that independent journalism can thrive in Chardi colour. And I have to say, from our side at Satellite TV, we pass on our congratulations to Baaz News. Well done to the team there. I've met certainly at least a couple of the guys who've contributed articles to Baaz News. Really solid people, really solid guys who, and when they write these articles, their knowledge is absolutely second to none. The research that they've done, the research that's gone into so many articles that appear in these long form articles on Baaz News. Unfortunately, we rarely have the time on our channel to cover them, to give them the justice that they deserve, because there is so much supporting information and genuine evidence that go into these articles on Baaz News that we can only touch on and refer our audience to go read those articles. Because when we report, when we cover some of the articles that they cover, we don't have the time to actually prove what we're saying as the truth. And we often say, when we talk about these articles, look, if you don't believe us, go to these articles where all that evidence, the proof, the deep research that's gone into supporting the arguments and the truth that these articles bring out, it's all there. So we often do say that please read these articles in the long form so you can truly understand what has happened behind the stories that we then report. So James, I think from all of us at Satellite TV, well done to our fellows at Baaz News, well done to you, and we wish you a very, very prosperous and successful future there.
Absolutely. I mean, congratulations to the entire team over there. We know it's a tough world in news, in documentary, and in media in general. So, 4 years, congratulations. We look forward to watching you as you grow over the next 4.
Indeed, we absolutely do. As I say, we're all aligned. All of us, all our channels are all aligned in the same with the same end goal. And long may we all thrive and succeed in that. Khalistan Zindabad to that one. Okay, James, let's move on to our comments column. And again, after my podcast with Dr. Sandhu, again, loads and loads of comments after that one. And Shahida Begum said, Palestinians, Sikhs and Kashmiris, the people deserve to be independent. Well, I couldn't argue otherwise, James.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to, I'll let the line speak for itself, because I could get into that very much in depth about how they're being treated and how they're not being independent right now and being oppressed. So let's leave it at that and move on to the next comment, Angus.
Absolutely right. I think that is a rabbit hole we could dedicate about 3 shows to, but let's not at the moment. Right, what else went into? Now we come back to the dreadful crimes, these assaults against women in India that we've covered on a 2 regular basis. But one was that particular case recently regarding the arrest in the rape case. The problem is you just don't know who is really involved. And we actually said this at the time when we raised eyebrows about the doctor who was raped and murdered, sadly, in Kolkata. Quick justice, somebody was very quickly charged and sentenced. But we did raise an eyebrow at the time saying, there is a danger that justice was done too quickly. Have they got the right man? And 1S1 and 2 raises the point, look, the police can be bought and sold like politicians. Who will be the scapegoat depends on the highest bidder. And vendettas are also often settled in the same way. Look at the Lakhimpura case. The driver of the MP's car was murdered by the police in custody and used against the farmers that had been mowed down. And I think this raises one real issue, one real problem, and I think this is correct, is that, in India, the rule of law, whilst it exists in name, in practice, it really is deeply problematic because, there's too much corruption in India, as we've seen. It's not just low-level basic corruption, which is bribery, where the law can be bought and sold at will by the highest bidder, as 1S1 and 2 refers to. It's also deeply corrupted by the political establishment, as we often talk about. Sadly, like unfortunately I'll refer to in Nazi Germany, where the Nazi Party managed to infiltrate the legal system, the judiciary itself, by putting their own place people. That's what's happening slowly but surely in India, is that the legal profession and the judiciary is being politicised. It has been taken over by the political establishment. By that, read the Hindutva, RSS, and of course the Brahmins. that unfortunately means that the law itself, the rule of law, is corrupted, is stained, and is tainted in India, and that unfortunately I think is what's happened in India, James.
Absolutely. And, when we continue to look at the corruption, at the different ways in which it's impacting not just India, but outside of the borders, I mean, we just seem to be pulling back layers of an onion that is never ending. It's the, magical never ending onion that we keep peeling layers back and it never ends.
Yeah, and Govinda Soren follows the same theme, says the whole of India is slave and no rule of law. Media and judiciary are all corrupt. Yeah, absolutely. And again, actually bringing in the media, of course. The media, well, I don't know if corrupt is the right word, but basically it is certainly paid for by the RSS and Hindutva agenda. There is no free press in India, and therefore I suppose by definition you could say it is corrupt. And then that word slave, yeah, we often talk about the caste system, James. India, the majority of Indians are actually slave without them actually realising it. They are in a prison of their own making, this caste system, which is very much alive and well in India.
So true, Angus, so true, and that's something that you've discussed in length many a times.
And TC comes back to the emergency film, Transnational Repression Reaches the Cinema. Yeah, again, actually you're right. This transnational repression takes many forms. There's the obvious form, the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, etc., that we talk about, and of course intimidation, etc. But yeah, absolutely, the media plays a part in this intimidation, this indoctrination. That in itself is transnational repression coming from India. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that film Emergency is actually just another form of transnational repression. And the UK government, as you say, needs to recognise this, weed it out, criminalise misinformation. Yeah, and I think maybe you're right. Maybe our laws here in the UK and across the West, generally speaking, maybe they're not strong enough against misinformation. Maybe, and again, this is this fine line between free speech and misinformation. It's a grey area, and there is a line somewhere, but it's very hard to define that line, because if you push the line too far, you start imposing limits on free speech, and really you must not. You must always default by allowing free speech, but of course by doing that, you are unfortunately letting in misinformation almost unintentionally. But where do you draw that line, James? I think that is the problem that we will perpetually have.
Absolutely, Angus, and that's something that we'll be covering tomorrow night, looking at AI in today's world, and not just in medical, but also how it is shaping the narrative online as it's being more and more relied upon to filter out a lot of content instead of actually having real people doing that work on different platforms. And again, the filters and the AI systems are open to bias, and they are only as good as the data they are fed. So with that, of course, it creates just an open flow and perpetuates this open flow and spread of misinformation. And yeah, there's got to be different ways to deal with it and different ways to monitor it.
Yeah, it's a very difficult area. TC finishes off by saying a legally based no tolerance approach to this is essential. I mean, I would in principle agree with that, but in reality, in practice, it's very difficult to define what is misinformation, because one person's information is another person's misinformation. One person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. It's all about definitions. It's all about interpretations and perceptions. It's actually very difficult to define what specifically is misinformation. It's not black and white, unfortunately. So that's a tough area.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, Critics Corner makes a wonderful return, a robust return. Ash Shah wades in with, you should give a place for Khalistan in the UK. Well, I have to say, I would welcome it. While going from London to Edinburgh, there are a lot of empty land. Please give place to Khalistan there. This so-called doctor is explaining fake story to a fake anchor, a new YouTuber. Okay, well, first of all, I don't know if you live in the UK. If you did, actually, if you travel from London to Edinburgh, there actually isn't a lot of empty space between there. Certainly not if you travel by train. Clearly, you don't know much about the space between London and Edinburgh. But this so-called doctor, well, he is actually a very highly qualified doctor who's been practicing medicine for decades. And if you don't believe that, please research him, and it might give you a bit of a shock. It's not a fake story. Everything that he said is documented and true. It is out there in the public domain. It is indisputable. Everything that he said is true. He referred to the Constitution. He even gave evidence from the Constitution itself supporting his discussions and his arguments. A fake anchor I don't know. Am I made of plastic? Am I AI? As often we're accused of being, James. And then you, YouTuber, we've been around for quite a while. So James, I don't think we're fake anchors. Do you?
No, they might be big, Angus, but they're definitely not implants that I carry around here. There's nothing fake there.
And in fact, when I met various people at Deepa Singh's sentencing in Birmingham a couple of weeks ago, a couple of people did come up to me and they said, look, in the beginning we thought you were AI, because they couldn't believe a white person like you and me, James, would actually stand up and talk on behalf of the Sikh community. It seemed almost unbelievable. And I suppose it is almost unprecedented what we do, James, because so few people outside the Sikh community do actually publicly stand up and support and speak out on behalf of the community. So I guess the default assumption is, yeah, we must be AI, because surely we can't be real.
And at the end of the day, let's face it, Angus, there's no AI system in the world that could create people that look as good as we do here.
Absolutely. Well, the fear is that one day AI might be able to, and then we're out of a job. But anyway, that's a whole different argument. Arun Bhargava says, so fake arguments. Hindus are the most persecuted by current Indian law. Temple money is taken by the government and actually given to Christians and Muslims. Sikhs are brothers. Khalistanis should go to Pakistan, as this is an ISI movement. Okay, let's cover that part to start with. This is interesting. You're saying that the Indian government are actually persecuting the Hindus most of all under Indian law. I'm not sure that's actually true, but interesting. Temple money is taken by the government. So what you're saying is the government are taking money from the Hindu temples and redistributing it to Christians and Muslims. Well, actually, any normal government does redistribute wealth from, in simple terms, the wealthy to the less wealthy as a form of socialism, just to support those in need and the more vulnerable. I don't know. I think you're spinning that in an interesting way. I don't disagree with it because I don't know the facts on that. But what you do say, Sikhs are brothers. Yeah, they are actually, funnily enough. But that is what the Khalistan movement is all about. But then you go and spoil it by saying Khalistan should go to Pakistan as it's an ISI movement. It's not. How many times do we have to reiterate this point, James? The Khalistan movement is nothing to do with the ISI. Even if it was supported by the ISI, it's not created by the ISI, it's created by the Sikh community itself. If they're supported by the ISI, fantastic. It's also supported by many people across the diaspora. It's supported by many people, white people, in the UK, Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, etc., etc. It's supported by many people. It doesn't mean it was created by the British, the Canadians, whatever. No, I'm afraid we disagree with you on that one. And then you actually say that the SGPC, the Shiromani organisation overseeing Gurdwaras in the Punjab, was actually created by the British to divide Sikhs and Hindus, which removed Hindu deities from Gurdwaras. I don't know if that is true. I think the SGPC was actually created by the Sikh community itself, and the British might have overseen it and allowed it to happen. But, well, maybe there are more informed members of our audience who can advise on that. But I would take that very cynically. I'm not entirely sure that's true, James. I think, but anyway. All I would say is, Arun Bhargava, thank you for your comments. An interesting insight from a Hindu perspective, I suspect.
Absolutely. And let's face it, Angus, within any organization or any movement, there's going to be people that actually get connected and get into them for the purpose of creating a divide between communities. But it is not what necessarily that group is about. It's just people that infiltrate to cause that chaos.
Yeah, and I'll just pick out one part of your comment there where you say Sikhs are brothers. And I think absolutely, I totally agree with that and endorse that comment and that sentiment. Sikhs are brothers of ordinary Hindus and Christians and Muslims, ordinary Indians across the whole nation. They don't see you as an enemy. They never have seen you as an enemy. The only enemy of the Sikhs are the Brahmins, are the ruling caste, the ruling elite of India, who actually are probably your own enemies as well. You don't realise it. They have created this prison within which you live. Again, I'm assuming you're a Hindu. And this is what Khalistan is all about. This is why Khalistan will open its borders, open its doors to brothers in India saying, look, we treat you as equals, we see you as equals, we don't see you as enemies, we don't try and coerce you into becoming Khalistanis, we don't coerce you into becoming Sikhs, whatever. It is an open door and we see you as brothers. So yeah, that's what it's all about. That's what Khalistan is all about. So don't be divided by your own government. That's what your government's trying to do. Etc, etc. And then, Jez, I'm just going to move on to our final comment, which actually, I just put it here just for a bit of fun. White-skinned, dumb Khalistani, dumb whitey. Fortunately, we don't get too many insulting comments. Most of our critical comments are actually, they have a point, and they do try and make a point, and they disagree with our narrative. They provide a counter-narrative. But I just thought it's just a bit of a laugh, just to get a bit of a silly comment like this, James.
Exactly. And, what fun is it if they're all positive?
Exactly. So thank you, Shmir Pash, for your very well thought out, your very well argued comment on that one. Right, talking about well argued comment, let's get on to something a little bit more intelligent. World 22 IDE. This was a very interesting comment. Loads of interesting points in this comment, and again, we don't have the time to go through this in great detail, but I just wanted to pick out one or two elements of this comment which I thought was very interesting. India was never a country; it was a subcontinent. And actually, and I've got to preface this, there were two very long threads on a couple of our videos which had long arguments between various people. Ashley Kandar waded in there, one of our irregulars. But many of our regulars waded in with some very, very interesting arguments, counter-arguments, and unfortunately, again, we didn't have time and space to go through and pick out those arguments. But I just particularly picked one comment that was amongst all of those, which I thought was a particularly interesting comment because it does raise and summarise a few of the issues. India was a subcontinent. Sikhs never asked for asylum, and again, it refers back to arguments talking about that I think Sandy Munro made, that Sikhs had sought asylum. But World 22 says, look, they never sought asylum. When you don't have a country for yourself at that time, Sikh leadership got played by the Hindu leadership because they trusted Gandhi and others and Nehru, etc. And Gandhi actually said, take my words, if ever Congress betrays you, you will be justified to draw the sword as taught by Guru Gobind Singh Ji. Yeah, well, they were betrayed, and that's the point. The point is that Gandhi made a promise and then the Sikh community was totally betrayed. That's why we're arguing about it all even today. And you go on. And this is an interesting point. And this person says, look, a lot of you that are arguing against us, you're learning what you refer to as, you're learning by the WhatsApp university. You know, there's a university of WhatsApp. Or in RSS Shaka schools. In other words, you're not learning the truth. You're just being fed indoctrinated misinformation, whether from the RSS schools or, of course, from WhatsApp and social media, which, of course, is swamped by Hindutva propaganda, which I thought was a very important point. And then you make a really important point. When the British first arrived, they dealt with Sikhs separately as a sovereign nation. They fought 3 wars. And when you were slaves, we have our own kingdom. So in other words, when you lot were slaves of the British, we had our own kingdom. We had the Sikh kingdom. We fought 3 wars to defend our kingdom. What did you do? And again, highlighting this fact that the Sikhs were, as of themselves, a very powerful independent nation before the British came along, and they resisted the British for a long time until finally they couldn't fight against the might of the British Empire. But then, importantly, it goes on to say, look, India is a very fragile nation. They're always scared, and they're killing Sikhs. They're stabbing us behind the back in the Punjab, etc., etc. Important point. A nation is insecure and is scared, and the symptoms of that, and actually interestingly, I'm going to look at Switzerland to give you an example of this. The reason that India has attacked the Punjab and done much of what it's done is because it's insecure. It fears for the integrity of its borders. This is why it's so hard on secessionism, because it genuinely fears the power of the Khalistan movement, because it could potentially break up India, and they know that. That's what they fear. Switzerland, I've lived in Switzerland. Every house almost in Switzerland bears a Swiss flag. And I said at the time, this is really weird. There's this almost artificial patriotism about Switzerland. Switzerland's made up of Italians, Germans, French. And in itself, Switzerland has a deep insecurity as a nation because it's relatively young, like India. It's actually older than India, but even then, it's deeply insecure. So it has to impose this almost false patriotism to try and unite and bind Swiss people together under the Swiss flag, because it knows actually there are these deep divisions between Germany, Italy, and the French. In other words, Switzerland could itself break apart. And that is the same in India, because it's made up, as we often say, of all these different identities, these different cultures. And again, it's symptomatic of India's deep insecurity. And then finally, to wrap up this, James, this is very, I think, again, very indicative of the power of the Sikh community and the deep history and culture of how much the Sikhs actually contributed to India, which has never been repaid and never actually really acknowledged. In the 1962 war with China, Punjab donated 252 kilos of gold, while the rest of India donated 5 kilograms, etc., etc. And also, referring to Indian independence, the Sikh community contributed a disproportionate amount of troops and power and might, whatever you want to call it, against the British compared to the rest of India. In other words, the Sikhs were the vanguard of the fight against the British that gained independence, whereas the rest of India played a very small part. It was the Sikhs who actually, essentially, gave independence to India. And what did they get in return? They get betrayed by the very Indians who they gifted independence to. James, I will hand it back to you. There's a lot of points in that one.
Absolutely, and there is, and we could go on forever on that, but at the end of the day, I think we'll just sum it up by saying that we know that the Sikh community is genuine, true, and they almost to a fault in the fact that they have trusted these words that have been given to them by India throughout their history and really relied on the integrity of those promises that were never fulfilled, Angus.
Absolutely. And this is why, as I often say, this is why the Brahmins fear the Sikhs, because the Sikhs' history is massive. They were a warrior people. They had their own empire. They fought the British successfully for so long, resisted the British, unlike the rest of India. And they've continued. It's in their genes, basically. And this is why they fear Khalistan, because they know that the Sikh community will achieve Khalistan, that they will break away from the rest of India. They know that the Sikh community form an existential threat to the Brahmanical control of India. That is what they're so terrified of. But this is why the Khalistan movement will be successful. This is why Khalistan will happen in our lifetimes, in the foreseeable future. So long may that happen. But James, unfortunately there, we must draw things to a close as always. We are well over time. But thank you so much for watching Perspectives for another day. Please do keep those comments coming in. Loads of fantastic comments, really interesting comments. Thank you to each of you that have contributed on there. They're always very fascinating to read, very educational to read. So thank you for those. Do keep them coming. Also don't forget you can message us directly at message@satellitestv.com if there's anything you'd like to bring to our attention directly. But in the meantime, thank you once again for watching. It is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.